chairperson of Ndifuna board giving us a short welcome, and then I will introduce our panelists, and then we'll get straight into the meat of why we are here this afternoon. All right. Shuaib, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honorable task to welcome all of you to this very emblematic venue, the District 6 Homecoming Center, which is just down the road from the District 6 Museum. It is iconic and emblematic because it's an illustration or a testimony to the brutality of the apartheid regime. But I think this venue and the museum are also testimony to resistance and hope. And that's why we're here today, because of our resistance and our hope. The Constitution gave us rights. But I think what we've learned in the last 30 years of our democracy is that those rights do not materialize unless we fight for those rights and we contest those rights. So in a sense, the Constitution's given us the right to have rights. But we have to struggle for those rights, and that's why we're here today. One of the most formative books I've read, one of the books I've read which influenced me greatly in my formative political career was The Eye of the Needle by Rick Turner. And it was a socialist blueprint written in very simple terms. It was actually published by a Christian institute called Procast. And what we're calling for today is the need for utopian thinking and the need for radical imagination. That's what we need, radical imagination. What we see here is emblematic of the apartheid regime. What the apartheid regime did was destroy the entire District 6. But the apartheid regime were very efficient house builders. They built Manhattan, they built Mitchell's Plain, they built Kylie. They didn't build homes, they built houses. But they destroyed communities. In our radical imagination, we only don't want to build houses, we want to build communities. And that's why we are here today again. So while we play an oppositional role as Ndifuna Ukwazi and many of the other organizations represented here today, we're not only opposition. If you look at some of the work that's done and we look at some of the exhibitions up upstairs, it's about co-creation. We're not here to oppose, we're here to work together with the city as part of this radical imagination to co-create a city that is a city for all, that is inclusive of all Capricornians. So what we want today is, there's a wonderful kind of poster display on Johannesburg and some of the work done by one of the Christian mission institutes in the Methodist Institute in Johannesburg. And it says, as you will see, solutions are not only possible, they already happen. And that's why we're here today. So, as I welcome you, we want to see all our participants, hopefully, will give us a vision of this radical imagination. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Shuaib. So, this debate was organized because Ndifuna Ukwazi, Plus, and Seri had identified, along with all the social movements that we work with, we have identified one pressing issue that no one in the political space was talking about: housing. We understand that the issue of housing is no longer a priority. Specifically, land for housing is missing from the political debate. So we wanted to understand exactly where is this question of housing on your priority scale? Where is this question of affordable, well-located housing for the working poor, for the majority of your constituencies in your manifestos? Are you even thinking about that question? And how is that interrelated with the question of the failing land reform programs? Never mind restitution and redistribution. The whole of this conference or this gathering is premised on urban land justice. We understand that politicians will wax lyrical about the rural question, but no one's talking about the urban land question. What does redistribution look like in the urban scene? What does a just city look like? We're hoping that your positions will answer some of these questions, as well as lay out what you think would be the solution to some of the most pressing questions that our people face, that we are faced with in terms of food insecurity, climate change, tenure insecurity, and how these all coalesce to create a very difficult situation that voters are facing going into 2024. What is the light? What is the hope? What is the reimagination, as Shuaib has said, that you guys are prompting us to think about here tonight? With me on the stage, we have, from the Good Party, Mr. Brett Heron. Thank you for joining us. He's the Secretary General of the party. Next to him, we have Fighter Gathiso Temba. He is with the Economic Freedom Fighters, and he's the Provincial Command Team Leader. Next to him, we have Atoli Lenograla, and he is Rise Mzansi's Western Cape convener. Next to him, we have Mr. Zaki Ahmad. He is an independent candidate running in 2024. Last but not least, we have Lucian Davids from the ANC Youth League Provincial Task Team, and he is the convener in that space. Help me to welcome them all. Okay, so let's set out the rules of each speaker will have 10 minutes to set out their position. We will then have 10 minutes question and answer. We will also provide time for rebuttals if that's necessary. And then the rest of the time will be allocated to the floor. The point of this debate was to create a town hall atmosphere where people can get the direct democracy that our current dispensation lacks. So please be open to answering questions from the floor specifically. All right. Thank you, guys. I'll ask then Mr. Brett Heron to start us off. As my chairperson reminds me, we had to apologize. The Democratic Alliance was invited, and they had confirmed attendance. But at the 11th hour, they pulled out due to their reasons. We won't say that they're cowards. But nonetheless, let us engage with the participants that are brave enough to show up in front of the electorate and set out a vision going into 2024. Help me to welcome Mr. Brett Heron.
Is that all right if I sit? Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We were given a few topics that you wanted us to cover in this discussion. But before I even get to those topics, I must say that I entered the room at the tail end of the inclusionary housing debate. And I was absolutely mind blown, and if I could swear, I would use some more profound language, that 5 years later, after having been involved in many discussions around inclusionary housing, that the same debates are being held in the city, going round and round and round in circles, without actually getting to implementing an inclusionary housing policy. And actually, with hindsight, being given this topic, inclusionary housing is a really important part of the urban land debate. Because how we use the land that is in the urban space and how it's used by private developers is directly connected to the land justice issue. And I am shocked and disappointed that the work that was done 6-7 years ago, that culminated in a draft policy for the city of Cape Town at least, is still being debated by the same people on the stage 5 years later without any sign of progress. So I have to make that point because it's really a disappointment and it shows a lack of political will. And I'm going to have to incorporate that into this land justice debate, because how we use that land and how developers use development rights they don't actually have as of right is directly related to how they can contribute to affordable housing in well-located areas and create integration in a city that's so hugely segregated. So I want to make that point first. Then to say the land question is an important question in many respects beyond just housing, because it really is to some extent, I think, the original sin. The original sin of apartheid and colonialism, the deprivation of land to people, black South Africans, is the original sin that we have never actually fully addressed. And for as long as it remains unresolved, the implications for climate change and food insecurity and economic opportunities and economic justice, those issues are all touched by the fact that we have not addressed the spatial violence and the spatial injustice that has occurred over centuries and decades that excluded black South Africans from land access. And that spatial injustice, which we can say is part of the original sin, plays itself out today in the legacy that we see in our cities and towns around South Africa, where people are segregated, excluded, and where the state's intervention is not resolving that original sin. In fact, the state's intervention is perpetuating that exclusion and that, what I call the original sin, that spatial injustice and that spatial violence. We were asked to talk about land reform, and there's no one in this room who's going to say the land reform program hasn't failed. It's failed dismally. But it is, as we heard earlier, something that is guaranteed as our rights in the Constitution. Section 25(6) and Section 25(7) of the Constitution guarantee land reform for those who were discriminated against in the past. The state has an obligation to rectify that, either through providing restitution or through providing some equitable redress. And that has failed dismally. And it's failed largely not because there's a lack of land, but because of conflict of interests and because of lack of political will. And so the land reform program, if you're a constitutionalist, you will identify that as a political leader, as someone who holds executive office in any office, whether it's in national government, provincial government, or local government, that you have an obligation in terms of Section 25 of the Constitution to implement land reform and to address the security of tenure of those who are insecure and landless. It is an obligation, and it is not a gift to those people who are waiting somewhat patiently, but increasingly less patiently, thank goodness, for what is their right. So we have to, for the good part of these, we embed our response to land reform in the Constitution, which guarantees the right to land reform and to restitution and to redistribution. In the urban space, that means public land for public good. The land that belongs to the public, all of us, held in custody on our behalf by the state, national government, provincial government, city government, should be used for public good. And the public good, one of the most pressing public needs is access to land in order for us to deliver affordable, dignified housing. And so the land that belongs to the people of South Africa is public land, a public asset, and should be used to address our housing crisis. I see I've already used 5 minutes. The housing program, the housing program was implemented shortly after the new housing program, 1994 elections. And it has also failed South Africa. It has failed, it may have delivered 4 million RDP or BNG houses, but it has not delivered a just and dignified way for South Africans who are homeless to live. What the housing program has done has chased numbers. They've chased numbers at the expense of where the housing is built and what kind of communities these housing programs are actually creating. They're creating suburbs of poverty because we chase large-scale projects, 1,000 houses at a time, 600 houses at a time, where everybody who qualifies for one of those houses has a household income of below 3,500 rand a month. So you're creating these huge suburbs of poverty with absolutely no amenities on the outskirts of the city, perpetuating the apartheid legacy. The housing program is broken, despite the fact that there are impressive 4 million houses that have been built. The housing program is broken, and we would fix it by looking at more local conditions. The housing program should respond to local conditions, and the threshold, that 3,500 rand per month, has been there forever. The housing program can only be fixed when it responds to local market conditions. Those of you who heard the inclusionary housing debate now would have heard about the costs of land in Cape Town, the costs of holding the land for development. The property market in Cape Town is fundamentally different to the property market in almost every other town in the country. And you cannot have 3,500 rand being the threshold, no matter where you live in South Africa, regardless of the market conditions, regardless of what is available in that market, as the threshold to qualify for state-subsidized housing. So the reforms that are needed need to respond to local market conditions so that there's a just outcome for the public housing program and not a cruel outcome, where a family that has a household income of 3,600 rand a month is disqualified from a free basic house in a market like Cape Town where there's nothing else. I've got 2 minutes. We were also asked to talk about informal settlements, and again, the theme is fundamental failure. Upgrading informal settlements is a hugely complicated process, but it's made more complex by the top-down approach that government implements. Instead of going to communities, and there are several informal communities that have decades of history of living together in those conditions, and working with cohesive informal settlement communities to understand how they can lead the process for their own upgrade of the land. So the starting point would be to acknowledge that they live there legitimately, that they are occupying the land legitimately, they should get tenure as a community, and then working with government, they should decide how their land should be upgraded and developed. And if government is going to come in, redesign the community, displace people out of it in the informal settlement space, and I think the starting point is to identify, recognize, and accept that the people therefore should lead the process in their own development and how their settlement develops. A well-located land, the Good Party has really started out of a fallout with the DA around the use of well-located public land for urban housing. And so our position on the role of well-located public land in urban spaces is unequivocal. It should be used for housing purposes, both in mixed income developments, but also infill projects, like in Woodstock and Salt River. Sorry, my mouth is dry. Salt River, they are city-owned parcels of land that are 200 or 300 square meters large. You could easily do 2 or 3 B&G houses with a decent facade that would blend into Salt River and Woodstock without anyone even knowing from the outside that that is a B&G house. And you could start by getting the people who've been waiting since the 1970s on the waiting list for those houses. You can put them in those well-located properties. Finally, the question about land expropriation of land without compensation. We've always held the view that Section 25 of the Constitution allows for expropriation without compensation. It required, perhaps it would require, although the Constitutional Court already in 2012 acknowledged that land could be, or property could be expropriated without compensation being paid. But we've now got the draft expropriation bill, which we support, which says that land can be expropriated, taking into account the history of the land, its ownership, and justice and equity. And I'll give you one example just to close off. The migrant labour hostels that still exist throughout South Africa. Sorry, my mouth is really dry now. But we still have several hundred hostels built by private developers to support migrant labour during the apartheid era. And those owners have long since abandoned those buildings. People are living in those buildings, and government says we can't do anything about the conditions in which they live because it's private property. That property should be expropriated without compensation, and government should take responsibility for creating dignified living spaces for the families that are in those hostels. Thank you.
My name is Kahisu. One mistake was correct. I'm not the provincial command team leader. I constitute part of the provincial command team. I'm responsible for political education in the EFF in Western Cape.
Sorry, can you hold the mic closer to your mouth?
Sorry for that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, thanks. Look, I think the first thing first we want to do is firstly we have to congratulate the EFF for its 10-year anniversary. I think it's a great achievement for a post-democratic political party, to make it to 10 years. But equally, I think we must congratulate its component, the student command, on the great victories it's doing in the institutions of higher learning. Because it is said that if you want an idea to exist and to live long, you must be able to plant the seed within the future intellectuals. And I think it is those intellectuals that will carry the idea of economic emancipation, at least in our lifetime. So I think all of us then can agree that the EFF is a political idea that's born out of a concrete. It's a rose, that rose out of concrete. So our first claim we're going to make here is that South Africa is a modern state, right? And if you accept the argument that South Africa is a modern state, you'll accept that South Africa is a post-colonial state. So before we speak about the post-colonial, perhaps we must speak about what constitutes this colonial logic, right? Because if we do not do that, I think we would have missed a very important nuance in the debate. So we, as the EFF, claim to be a socialist party. We depend on Marxism, Leninism, and Fanon to conduct our own politics, right? But secondly, we do not claim to have invented the revolution or the struggle. What we do claim, however, is that we've been able to inherit the struggle, and we are able to plant at least the ideas of liberation, the ideas of emancipation amongst the population and the populace at large. So in an attempt to answer this historical question, and I do agree with Brett that the land question is a historical sin. But part of what we then claim is that the failure to address the land question in South Africa, the failure to address the urban land question, continues to haunt our imagination of creating a nation. And up until we redress this, we would have done very little, at least to build this very nation that we seek to do. We believe that it is only through the return of the land, via the expropriation of land without compensation, that we should truly experience economic freedom, at least in our lifetime. So if you accept my logic, that South Africa is a modern state which is formed on a post-colonial logic, part of what you then have to accept is that South Africa is an offshoot of what you can call a modern capitalist system of how you organize society. Right? This means that South Africa then becomes, like I've said, the offshoot of a post-colonial capitalist modernity. The post-colonial capitalist modernity is a project that organizes society on three distinctive features. So what are these three distinctive features that continue to characterize South Africa? One is that a colonial system is established on the logic that it presides over a subhuman category that is existing outside the province of Europe. Yeah. And that particular society services what you call the Euro-American needs. And at the center of servicing those needs is racism. The second that you then have to accept about the colonial logic is that it's founded on what you call white supremacy and white ideas. So if you accept that South Africa is established on racism and white supremacy, part of them what you also have to accept is that colonialism was a conquest of genocidal proportions. And what genocide also produces is that it produces what is called the undead, who exist in permanent anxiety. So what you have in South Africa is that you have army of colonial subjects who have survived the colonial genocide. If you accept our argument, then part of what you then have to accept is that part of what colonialism creates is what is called cheap disposable labor. So consequentially, you cannot put cheap disposable labor within urban spaces. The second claim we're going to make about the colonial project is that it creates what is called the precarious labor market. So you trace the South African labor market to the slave camp apartheid system, right? The third argument we're going to make, and if you accept our first two arguments, is that colonialism must be understood as a war. Because it is a war that seeks to unpeople the people that it finds in a particular native land, right? So if you accept colonialism as a logic that's based on war, part of then what you have to must ask yourself is that what happened after World War II? Did Europe depend on the markets to organize society? And the answer is that is no. Europe depended on the state as an instrument that organizes society. So as the EFF we say, let us expropriate land for equal redistribution and place it under state custodianship. Because you cannot depend on the markets to organize your society. You cannot depend on the markets to build roads. You cannot depend on the markets to build clinics, to build hospitals, to build housing. It cannot. Especially if you are convinced by our superior logic that colonialism is a war. And post-war you have to construct a new society. So, what also then happens in a colonial logic? In a colonial logic, part of what happens is that you get what is called a cultural mummification and a spiritual gamification. So the majority of the black society and the black community is a community that exists in permanent anxiety, placed in an unethical existence called the township. So you cannot moralize the township. You cannot, look at the township and say, how do you develop it or reform it? You have to demolish it. And part of how you demolish it, like we said, is that you have to expropriate land without compensation for equal redistribution. So you begin to declutter the township. Once you declutter the township, your second move will be massive industrial program. Because you have to look at the question, how do you connect the very same people that you are removing out of the township into sustainable jobs? I see they say we are left with 2 minutes. So the other claim that we're going to make today is that there is a symbiotic relationship between the education system and the colonial project. Because the colonial project was a midwifery to the education system that you find in South Africa. So there can be no sustainable land reform outside the question of decolonizing the education system. Because you cannot produce the very same hegemony in a decolonial future that the EFF is imagining, right? So how did we get here? We got here because in South Africa, in the apartheid, at least South Africa, there were 13 land legislations that were passed. One of them at least being the Glen Grey Act. And I don't want to go deep into it because I think many of us here know what the Glen Grey Act did. So does the expropriation of land under the EFF seek to that people will lose their houses? Absolutely no. The EFF says that we must decommodify the land. So you remove land as a commodity that can be tradable, right? So the property on top of the land remains yours. What gets ceded to the state is the access land that is outside your house, which is meant for residential purposes. Once you've done that, you are able to locate land for particular purposes. You are able to use the state, like I've said, to declutter, but you're also able to use the state for purpose of industrialization. You're able to locate land for spiritual purposes. You're able to locate land for farming. You're able to locate land for any other activities that are of social importance to the system. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. As introduced, my name is Akoli Lenofwala, and I am the Western Cape convener for Rise Mzansi. I firstly want to thank the organizers, all three organizations, for the invitation, and just want to thank everyone who took their time to be part of this convening. And I want to congratulate Rise Mzansi for turning 5 months. So, I mean, as I've just said, 5 months, we are going into what we call the People's Convention from the 6th to the 8th of October, where we will be crystallizing many of the policy positions that will be discussed at that time. And everything that we've been listening to, that we've been hearing from the people that we've been engaging with over the past 5 months across the country. But before I get into what I think the problems are and how we can get to resolve some of these issues around land, lack of access to land for the many, and lack of access to housing for the many, I think it's important to acknowledge that this panel shouldn't be as it is. We should not continue to have debates like this, where there's no women representative. Especially when you look at who is deeply affected by the issue of lack of access to land in the context of South Africa. And so, moving forward, as we move towards the elections next year, I do hope that there will be some diversity in terms of gender within these panels if they are to continue. That gets me to the point to say that the effects and the challenges that we talk about as a result of land disposition and as a result of lack of access to land have a race and have a gender. And it's important to acknowledge that if we are to deal with these things. Majority of the people that are affected are black and colored. Majority of the people that are affected are women. And that's something that should be at the basis of everything that we do and everything that we talk about. If we understand and acknowledge that, then our solutions and the things that we put forward are going to be able to deal with these things at the basis of everything that we're talking about today. Our crisis, I think it has come out in the previous speakers. We have a crisis of political leadership. That's the crisis that we have in the country. We don't have a lack of policies, we don't have a lack of legislation. There might be tweaks that need to be done around some of these things. But at the basis of everything, we have a crisis of political leadership. We have a lack of political will at every level of government. Local government, provincial government, national government. And those are the things that we should be dealing with. We should deal with the crisis that we have in terms of political leadership. And even when we talk about the issue of housing, we have to move away from just talking about housing when we talk about issues of land and spatial justice. Because that limits us to talking about what is known as top structure. We're talking about bricks that are put there for people to live, the RDP type of houses that is not working for anyone. We don't have a housing crisis, we have a human settlements crisis. That's what we have. And so in order for us to deal about these things, we need to acknowledge that it's not just about the structure that you build, it's where you build that structure. It's what comes with that structure. It's the safety that comes with that structure. It's the economic opportunities that comes with that structure. And so we should stop just talking about housing and talk about human settlements when we talk about spatial justice and when we talk about issues of urban land. And I think, as it has been said, we do need to also talk about these things and acknowledge the fact that these the issue of spatial injustice and lack of access to land as a race and a color. Therefore, we are dealing here with systemic racism and systemic discrimination. And that has to be part of our challenge as well. How do we undo and link the thing to the fighter on the left? The fact that since 1994 there were attempts towards nation building. We've abandoned that project. The project of nation building means that we have to undo the issue of spatial injustice. If we get them to talk about that, we are building a nation, then that means we have to undo everything. Cape Town, if you want to study apartheid, just look at Cape Town. These issues, of course, are not isolated to Cape Town, but if you want to study apartheid, if you're coming from another country, you want to study apartheid, come to Cape Town. This is the most divided city. This is a city where primarily the majority of people, which is black and colored people, live far away from where we are. Cape Town is 80% black and colored in terms of population. But if you look at where we are, that doesn't reflect in terms of who's the majority of this population. And so what we do need to do if we are to start to build the nation is to bridge that divide between these communities as well. A big injustice is the fact that we as black people and colored people fight for the little that we have in the context of Cape Town. And so we do need to bridge that divide if we are to try and overcome many of these things. The other thing that is important is that we don't, especially in this debate around land, we see the debate about land as if it's a national government issue. Municipalities are given the power to build houses. The failure, the homelessness failures that we see in Cape Town, the fact that there are informal settlements that have existed since 1987 that don't have basic services, that don't have dignified basic services, is a failure of local government. It's a failure of the city of Cape Town in the context of where we are. The fact that people died in Johannesburg is a failure of the city of Johannesburg in that building in which they died in. It's not a failure of national government, it's a failure of a municipality that has failed in its obligation in building houses and making sure that land goes to the people. And so if we are to deal with these things, one, we need to deal, not all municipalities have the same capacity, of course. Metropolitan municipalities have that capacity. They have the resources. The city of Cape Town's budget is 61.5 billion rands a year. That's a lot of money. There are people that are living in informal settlements that is deemed as private land, and therefore the city can't build toilets, can't build electricity. Why can't that land be expropriated? That land can be expropriated, whether it's compensation or not, there's money there. That land needs to be expropriated so that people can get basic services. So we need to deal with the issue of budgeting and priorities. We need to deal with the issue of capacities of municipalities. But we also need to deal with the issue of planning. We assume that the people that we elect that are there are planning, they have plans. And we know many of us that have done this work for over 10 years, for over 15 years. The city of Cape Town has no plan for informal settlements. They assume that people will wither away. from those informal settlements. Hence, some of their leaders within the province call people refugees because they assume that these people are going to go back.
15%, 20% because of the property prices that Brent spoke. So we have to work with the political parties to say to them, we need rent control. Under apartheid, we had rent control. Five left. Under apartheid, we had rent control. Now, why can't we have it now? Have we been educated about the problems of rent control as well as its advantages? And right now, we can only have advantages. There can only be advantages because people can't afford rent. When we look at informal settlements, I agree with what Brett says. But the critical thing is this. Have we made sure that everyone there does the type of work that actually people like him have been doing about getting people to understand the local budget? That can't happen in a small way. It has to happen in a big way. Because we've only touched a fraction of people. That the political parties have a lot more members, a lot more money, and they can do it. Right? We're not talking party political funding now, but this is the question. How do we turn out, and I want to disagree with the comrades from the EFF on intellectuals. Intellectuals aren't people who go to universities. Yes. Very often universities stymie intellectual development more than a community does. Yeah. Intellectuals are developed at every level of society. It depends on whether we study. Now, I'm talking too much because I've fasted for 3 days against corruption, and I didn't see anyone here apart from a few people there. That is not right. No one from a political party has come to say that Sifiso Buthelezi should go to jail because he destroyed Prasa. He and the ANC, I haven't heard anyone speak about the devolution of right, which Brett did the first program for, and it was the right one to do. Not because we want to be independent in the Western Cape, but local power is more important than national power. Local power is where everything should be decided and developed. I want to finish up on this. The National Land Transportation Act, people should study. The Municipal Systems Act, people should study. But above all, we need to talk about people. We need to talk about people. 10 years ago, I read an article about a boy with autism in Kaileka in RR6. He was 7 at that time. And he was tied up inside his house because he couldn't go outside. His mom couldn't go outside because he would want to go play outside. And they had to keep him back. His name is Musa. He lives in a shack. The only place he's comfortable on is on the ground. Sitting in a corner and looking at people, looking at the corner. He can't speak. When the floods come, what do you think happens? When the darkness goes of a broken state, what happens to a child living with disability? What happens to him? I went there and I had this. His dad, I was doing a long talk, 2 days talking, and his dad said, please come to my house. I went there and I saw the flood, how it reached him. 17 years ago, SASSA, the city, the province and national government have done nothing to remedy his situation. His mom had a stroke, and she's disabled. You can read the articles in Ground Up, which, by the way, I still think is the best newspaper. Not because a friend of mine runs it, but because it gives the voice of the community. It gives working class voices. So, what I want to say if your political parties come to you with grand manifestos and radical imagination, ask them for radical practice. I'm not interested in imagination. I've had imagination ever since I was a little drama queen at school. So I want to say radical practice. Magna!
Good evening, everyone. Mandla! Right, my name is Lucian Davids. I am a representative of the ANC Youth League. Also, currently appointed as the convener of the ANC Youth League provincial task team. I don't. I would like to tell you that I'm already here for a whoopee. Why? So I'm kidding there. Look, I don't wish to be verbose tonight. I don't wish to say anything grand, because there's nothing grand to say. Yes. What there is reaffirmation. Because state building, it's not something that a political party does on its own. State building is a collective effort. It takes the entirety of the people to build that state. And we need to work in conjunction in order to realize that South Africa for us. As you can understand, elections usually go like, no, we will bring you this and we will give you that. 5 years down the line, we see these things again. And that's the wrong way of looking at it. What should be happening ultimately is that representatives from this organization should be coming to you after the first few minutes of voting and trying to engage the community surrounding its issues. Now bringing it back to tonight's topic, which is land and tenure issues. I would firstly like to thank Ndifuna Ukwazi and all of the stakeholders that set up this particular discussion, because I mean it's not a secret that this has been a long-standing issue, and to think, as the narrative goes in society that everything that has happened wrong currently is entirely the ANC. That is throwing historical context out completely, and doing so is doing an entire disservice to ourselves as a people. Which brings me to then ultimately the point of giving a historical context to the issue of land in this country. Well, all of the other former speakers before me has highlighted very crucial points when it comes to, land in our country, the conditions of the people in relation to the land, in relation to housing, and the like. We must appreciate, right, that when it comes to land ownership and what the state can do, I recall Mr. President mentioned that, the state, or the public has land and it must make good use of that public land. We should then, ultimately run and refer back to the fact that, during various times in our history, we have been colonized, right? And if you fast forward now to the issues of land ownership today, we still see that in the 2017 land audit, that about 72% of land ownership is still mainly white, which then makes it a private affair, and it brings then now the question of land expropriation without compensation. How viable is it then for that program to be instituted if it is exactly the issue that the land holding is then, you know, if that 72% land ownership is then white, it also then makes it private, you know. And the misconception is that once that land is taken, people will be unhoused. It's not the case. What we are trying to advocate for is broad justice for the broad working class and poor that has until today not benefited anything from the land. Because if we talk about land, we must not only look at land for settlement. Land is a very important thing because it unlocks various types of economic activities. Land holds mineral resources. Land is for agriculture and for living, right? So now this begs the question then, how do we go about, you know, appropriating the land in an efficient manner? We then say, right, that ultimately from the utility side we are pushing to advance the land expropriation without compensation, right? At the end of the day, if we look at history, we must appreciate that the ANC in various times of its life halted, and it didn't seem as if it was able to continue. More relatable, we look at the 1940s in the birth of the ANC youth league. It then gave the ANC a new type of a power to enforce mass mobilization and give to it a militancy in order to bring South Africa to where it has been currently now. Though I do say that, look, there's much that must be done, but ultimately the ANC cannot do it alone, and it will never be able to do it alone. We need organizations like Right to Know, Ndifuna Ukwazi, and the broader communities to work with us in order to unlock the potential of this country. Right? One thing that I'm very sure of is that, you know, everywhere grandstanding will take place. Everyone would want to lead and take ownership of developing this country. But ultimately, developing this country is a collective effort, as emphasized earlier. It is mentioned as the, you know, the best run province and the best run city, though the deepest inequalities is taking place within the same city. So you find that the richest of, you know, both extremes exist here. The richest of the rich are here, but also the poorest of the poor. And the issue ultimately is, right, that we need to really deepen our work specifically in this city and also furthermore the rural areas, because I think this is a space that's also being neglected. The issue ultimately is, if we don't, you know, work and develop the rural areas, we will find that the urban areas will become more populated. And if you can understand, it's being a hot topic debate that why are so many people coming into the city, and the city this and the city that is always overcrowded, it's also being overcrowded. It's because the periphery is still being left as it is. And that is something that the DA must address in this country in conjunction with national government. Because if we are going to, you know, not work together as society at large, we can forget about advancing this country. We can really forget about doing that. Right? So ultimately, I would like to also invite all of you to keep your eyes open. And for the 8th of October, right? The ANC is set to have its manifesto review of the 2019 manifesto. So this means ultimately that you have a chance to listen as to, you know, what the ANC has done over the time, and specifically to the land. And I'm not mentioning this because I'm trying to talk about, you know, our achievements, but ultimately this is where you come in to say, but look, this hasn't been done, and you have the chance, you know, ultimately to I hope I can be protected here. Yeah. Ultimately to say that, look, we do have our challenges, but nothing can be done without society keeping us on the right path, because as I've emphasized before, that nation building ultimately is a collective effort. And I'm grateful that we can have these discussions, and I would like for more to roll out, so that we can really get to the heart of the matter. And I see I'm on 0 minutes, so
Thank you to all our speakers. Can I request that we maintain decorum? We all want to hear everybody's views, so let's respect each other in our views and give each other an adequate chance to put our views across. That said, I will give each speaker 2 minutes rebuttal time. So any points that you need to address in rebuttal, please use this time. Any additional points you'd like to make, please use this time. I'd also want to say quite pointedly, I've heard a lot of theoretical positioning. I haven't heard much of practical implementation in your 2 minutes, if you could also give us a sense of what we should have in mind when we go to the polls in 2024. Not the promise of 1994, but the doing of 2024. That would be appreciated. We can maintain the same order that we had gone in. Alright, so let's mix it up a bit. I see Brett is very happy to speak. I'll give it to Lucian, if you don't mind starting us off in the button. Thank you. To the crowd, may I ask, please remember my request. Let us respect each other. Let us give each other an opportunity to speak. We will have a dedicated time for questions from the floor, so your voice will definitely be heard. Okay?
Okay, well, thank you for allowing me in the platform. Look, in terms of the department's budget for 2023-2024, right? It's projected, to have just under 35 billion allocated towards spatial planning. And these allocations are running exactly for provincial and municipal grants, right? Emergency housing responses, and it also transfers to human settlements entities. Right, so to give you a breakdown of how that 35 billion will be exactly used, we're looking at 19.2 billion, which is allocated for provincial grants, 12.5 for municipal grants, 520 million for emergency housing response, and then a 1.7 billion ultimately for the transfer of human settlements entities, right? So now if we overall look at what is the difference, right, of year on year, it shows that this subsidy quantum, right, is an increase in 29.7% from the previous time. And the reason why I'm mentioning this once again, as you can see, these are all monies that's coming down to both provincial and local government municipalities. We want you to understand that if there are slow developments taking place, you need to address the proper people about this issue. It's sad that the DA isn't here tonight to also be accountable. But ultimately, we are saying that, as we're saying, right, these are, sorry, I'm not sure it's 0 minutes, so I'll be passing on the mic to you.
Thank you. This year is that it's cut they are going to cut it. But let's leave that aside for the moment. Austerity is coming in a very serious way. And we have to figure that in to what we're doing. I want to ask us not to wait until the next election, which is a few months away. But I'd like the people who are in Parliament now to ask every municipality, how much land have you sold? And to who have you sold it? Every municipality. Particularly starting with the metros. And we will see that land is being sold off in every municipality in this country. If you look at Robertson, just look at the destruction of the environment there with more shacks and more RDP houses, but central Robertson remains the same. So when I get to Parliament, and I will get to Parliament, because you're going to get when I get to Parliament, I'm going to do the boring work that the Commander-in-Chief said I should do. I want to serve on SCOPA, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. And I want every activist here to come ask me, what are you doing there and what can we do? Your voice needs to come into SCOPA. That's the committee that accounts, that looks at the fact that the few billions that they're giving now is a handful compared to what they've stolen.
Thank you.
And what they continue to steal. It's our job to make sure that doesn't happen. So, where can we go from here? We need to ask every MP now, I'd like the political parties who are there, to ask their principals, to ask these questions, because we want to know who has bought the land.
Firstly, I think it's unacceptable that we are given a history lesson. And at the center of them is this issue of nation building, which means that the spatial setup of the country is not sustainable. We have failed to undo the injustices of the past and the injustices of the current in terms of the spatial setup of the country. And our central focus is going to be nation building, which means that people need to be people need to access land that is available and that is also economically sustainable, and that's part of the nation building in terms of undoing the injustices of the past. But also when I spoke about this issue having a race and a gender, it also speaks to the dignity and the quality of life of those people. And that must be at the center, that must be a central focus, which means that what I spoke about in terms of fixing municipalities, the fact that townships are dirty, there is no refuse collection, there is no sanitation services, that speaks at the dignity and quality of life of the black and colored individual.
No, thanks. Look, the first realization we have to make as the society is that there can be no sophistication that can come out of the ANC and its neoliberal partners in an attempt to rescue South Africa from the deep morass that it finds itself. So immediately we must think around a future outside the ANC. We have to unplug ANC from power because their removal is not enough. They have to be unplugged from power. They have to be removed from everywhere. And if the ANC is interested in the idea of renewing itself, it must renew itself outside government. Secondly, the academic space will not tell you that land is a natural endowment. So that's the first premise you must move from. That land is a natural endowment that must be available to anybody to reside on, to reproduce on, but also for spiritual needs, right? That should be our first point of departure in the post-democratic South Africa. And ANC should have known this. Because if ANC had paid attention to its own logics, it would have known that a liberation party that's formed on nationalistic sentiment reaches a cul-de-sac. And as a consequence, you find the society the way it is. Now, what it can be done practically, at least Mpo is asking. One, I mean, look for example at the commodities such as chicken. We eat chicken at KFC, we eat chicken at Nando's, we eat chicken. Why can't we say 51% of chicken that's consumed in the Cape Metro must come from the Cape Metro? So the municipality must allocate land and farms for poultry farms. Secondly, we must say the value chain that moves the chicken from the abattoir all the way to the final consumer must be done by the people in the particular municipality. That's a practical way we can do that.
Okay, 2 minutes is not long enough for Paul to say what we will do. But let me start by agreeing with Zaki that land is the currency, the new currency of corruption. So we have to look at what land is sold and what land is purchased. If it's purchased over its market value, the donor is giving a kickback to the political party in government. If it's sold for less than its value, the donor is giving a kickback. So land is the new currency of corruption. What would we do immediately? Let's start with the land that we have discretion over. Let's use the land we have discretion over to build well-located, affordable housing, social housing, and free basic housing in the right places. And let's not fight about land that we've still got to expropriate and fight with another sphere of government about. Use the land we've got discretion over to build in the right places. Secondly, we must use expropriation where it will improve the quality of life for people. So expropriation of buildings and land to improve the living conditions of people and to improve access to housing. That's the next step we'll do. Zaki is right, the National Land Transport Act is a brilliant piece of legislation. It allows for the devolution of public transport functions to local governments that have capacity, and that must be pursued, because you can't talk about spatial justice without also talking about mobility and access. So let's get devolution of the right public transport functions to the right local governments. Allocate small infill sites for free basic housing. If you want to do integration, find those small sites that cities and towns and provinces own, and let's use them to build free basic housing instead of building 1,000 BNG houses on the outskirts of the city. And then finally, or no, maybe it's not finally, we need to amend the Spaluma Act to enforce an inclusionary housing policy in South Africa. No developer should get additional development rights without making a contribution to the housing crisis. And the only way it's going to happen is if Spaluma is amended to implement that. And then finally, we need to amend the Collective Ownership Schemes Act so that informal settlements can be resolved in a way that's just.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, thank you to all our panelists. We will now be doing our question and answer session. We'll be taking questions from the floor. I will just ask my colleagues to assist me in this exercise. So we will take these questions in rounds. I will ask that we take a first round of 5. And then we'll take another round, okay? 1, 2, 3, and it's great count.
Amanda! Today, the fact of what I'm speaking, that is the story. I'm a freedom fighter, not EFF. I said the education later, freedom now. I'm still staying in the town. I have 40 years in the town under the apartheid regime. Was no go area was made by me for that time. My question is coming to, I'm not asked a question to the two political parties, EFF and a good party, because I ask question I don't know, because I can't answer me for that question. I come directly to the ANC. My son, the ANC don't have a respect for the people. If the ANC, they love this country, will not send you to us. And secondly, the youth of the ANC, we don't have. My question to you, when I a youth that time, I stand a chance said, I leave my home, I carry the weapon to fight this apartheid. I was not concerned, down apartheid and down capitalism. Why ANC? They favoring the capitalism for the first place, because we are in this dilemma about that system. Because the capital system is a very cruel system to the world. Down rich, they stay rich, not poor, stay poor. That is the capital system.
My name is Jamila. I am from RPC, Reclaim the City, Sasigulas. Amanda. My thing is this, I have much respect for all of you. Voting is around the corner. Show me change, be part of it, and you'll have my vote. For too long, women are suffering. I've heard everything, but no one has spoken about load shedding. Women are suffering in this load shedding. No one has spoken about that. All I want is be the change for us to follow you. But we're not going to follow if there's no change. ANC, another night of candles. DA, different alliance of the South Alliance. I can't say nothing. All I can say is be the change for us to follow you. Because the only people that have Qurban is us. We are not going to do that anymore for our people. I'm too old for that. Zero tolerance.
Me too.
Thanks, comrades. Just two questions, comrades of the EFF. One, we want to check what is the position of the EFF in terms of the occupations. We know that currently in South Africa there's 3.7 million people that do not have access to adequate housing. And what we've seen in Johannesburg, comrades, is the criminalization of poor people that are working class. The EFF is leading the charge of evicting people in buildings in Johannesburg. So we cannot accept that, and they stay here and they stand here and can stand and say that people must have access to land when they're evicting people. Comrades are being evicted by the DA, and the EFF is doing the same thing in Johannesburg. So that's one question. What is that? What is the position of the EFF? But secondly, comrades, you are saying to us that you want to expropriate land so that it's in the hands of national government. So we're trying to check what is the position of the EFF with regards to State Land Disposal Act, which gives powers to the state president to collect land that own land. So what is the position of the FF on that particular question? That's what we want to know. So let me not finish everything from the chairman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joanne. I'm from Housing Assembly. I'm staying in Bloody Zone. Comrades, leadership of different political parties. You know, I'm so sick. I'm vulnerable. I'm hurt as an elder of my community and as a citizen. To hear every time different political parties come up, making excuses, promises, but you know, I'll take my head off for one new political party that arises, stands on the ground, and doing the work with the community and not with the staff of the political party. Comrade, it's been a long time that we as the most vulnerable need to arise and to raise our voice. I salute our comrade. He's a young man. He stand up for us as the vulnerable. They got talk about the ANC, got no respect for vulnerable people, not even for our kids. Our children have died in 2017. That's why DI is not even here, because I will throw it in their face. Our young blood, our future generation pass on. And they come back to these spaces to come, sorry comrade, to come and promote what they want to bring change. But we are the change. Rise, Mzansi, rise.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, remember decorum, high discipline, high morale. I said we take a round of 5. Our first person has forfeited. I will give to the panelists who have already been asked questions to answer, and I will take another round. I will take another round. Can we give them a chance to answer, please? Yes.
Thanks for the questions. I think there are questions which are directly to the EFF. There's also the general questions that I think anybody in the panelists can answer. Of course, one of the fallacies of the ANC is the argument that 1994 was a moment of freedom. And they call it what is called political freedom. We're beginning to question even the political freedom, right? Because freedom is not given to you in stages. But also freedom is not given. It's willed by those who seek it. Right? So we must seriously push back against the so-called post-democratic dispensation. Because it's nothing but the privatization of apartheid. Because apartheid continues under private healthcare, private accommodation, private complexes, private security. Private schools. It reproduces apartheid, private schools to be specific. The idea of nationalism by the ANC it's linked to capitalism itself. Because it is the postmodern societies that said to each nation its state, right? And you can't have the state without capitalism. It's a European logic. And the ANC borrowed it wholeheartedly and wants to implement it here. 29 years later, we're in a crisis. On the issue of ESCOM, Lita, Jamila, electricity is load shedding is a natural thing. There's a person who naturally goes and switches off the switch. It's not a sophisticated thing where there's a high demand, no. The idea is to unbundle ESCOM and put it into 3 different components. Why? Because Africa, just like during colonialism, is a stage where they must test the just transition. But if you go now to Durban, our so-called dead fossil fuel, it's living in numbers. Why? European countries are stockpiling coal because they know what's coming. So we must, of course, celebrate this idea of just transition. But we must look at who's the highest contributor of carbon emission. So when the EFF takes power, we're gonna do what Thabo Mbeki was saying at United General Council during the week. We must revamp the coal-powered fire stations. We must invest in hydropower, right? And we must invest in new technologies that, that limits the amount of emissions. On the issue of occupations and the criminalization of the poor, look, Linda, your question tries to dichotomize, evictions and criminality. Our people have been used for elements of criminality. We must isolate criminality. We must isolate those who hijack buildings. But we must also look at the areas where our people are staying. Those buildings are about to collapse. So what we should do, we should remove our people, put them in temporary housing, revamp the buildings that can be revamped, demolish those that can be demolished, and move our people back into those houses. On the issue of the president having power to dispose of land, absolutely I agree with you. But part of the conversation we must have is that the South African Constitution, so-called the best constitution in the world, gives too much power to the executive. The president of this country can go to war without consulting. The president of this country can go to war without parliamentary approval. So part of the questions we must speak about leadership is how do we reform the executive power, executive authority towards local state, towards provincial state. Now on the issue of you will vote for us, the EFF is currently engaged in what is called manifesto writing. So how are we going to vote about it? We're going to go to different constitutions, different sectoral and formalized institutions. They must come and tell us what our manifesto must look like. If you come to our manifesto submissions and your view is not there, I will gladly resign from the EFF.
I vote. We are recording. We are being recorded. This one is being recorded.
Thank you for the question.
Next speaker.
Thank you, Ma'am Jamila. I really appreciate it. Look, to answer the first question in terms of why the ANC is reinforcing and supporting capitalist policies, I can tell you the Youth League is fighting vehemently with the mother body about that. You could see in the news, I don't know if you can recall, but in the news, the Youth League has called Minister Pravin Gordhan to task about the selling of SOEs. That's one fight that we are embarking on as the youth, right? Because the selling of SOEs in our country is not benefiting anyone. It's not benefiting us as the working class and poor specifically. We've seen how the price of everything has gone up as a result of this rampant privatization that's been taking place. Right? And in terms of energy, that response interlinks with the fact that we as the youth, particularly, we need to look at not only just holding national government accountable, because it's easy to do that. It's easy to say, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, right? But collectively, how can we resolve the issue to see to it that everybody benefits in this country collectively? And I think that was the only two responses to the ANC. Thank you.
And I want to expand on climate justice and the environment. Who here has lived with a coal stove? Who here has lived with a coal stove? Who here has sat through the smoke of coal in your house? Anyone who has lived through coal will know that your sinuses go, your asthma rises, and all those things happen. That is what coals do. Sending people down mines to dig out in the worst conditions a resource which no one should use is a serious problem. It's a very serious problem. I don't call for the abolition of coal now, because we can't do it right now. But we must look to the abolition of coal. We must look towards green energy. I spent my holiday, I spent 2 years on a farm with solar energy, a friend's farm, a small one with solar energy. Not once did we lose power. That is what every household should have. I would like the EFF to actually study what coal is doing to our households, what it's doing to TB, what it's doing to the health of our people, everywhere. And then I want to come back specifically towards Eskom. Have you condemned what Machela Koko and Brian, what was his name? Brian Molefe has done? Have you condemned that, or have you supported it? Have you supported what the Guptas did? What the Guptas did in taking 57 million rand. 57 billion. Sorry. No. We need climate justice. And any political party who says to you that we cannot have coal, that we must have coal, it's in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry, it's in the pockets of the mining industry, and it must show. It must show what it's doing. Europe has far more green energy than we do. So does Kenya. Kenya is a smaller country, but with much more solar power everywhere. I visit you, I invite you to come to Kenya with me to see it.
Thank you for the responses. As promised, we will now do a second round. Can I ask, please keep it to a question, not a statement. And please do not introduce your question with a lengthy statement either. I will take the next round of 5, and then we'll give to the panelists to respond. On that note, may I use my position as chair? The question on giving land straight into the hands of people was not answered. Can I extend that question to the rest of the panelists in the next round? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4,
5. Comrades, we'll have a discussion and we'll come back to everyone. You noted the first hands and then we'll get to the discussion and come back. Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson. Leadership Dumela. You are suppressing me there when you're saying that we must not make a statement. However, I will try not to make one. Comrades, we are... Okay. Sorry, Chairperson, but I might as well. Comrades, here we are... The fundamental issue that, or the topic that we are, what we've gathered for this 3 days is the question of land. And within that space, there's activists that are operating. And on a daily basis, activists face a lot of repression, mainly from ANC cards. What would be your position in terms of addressing that, seeing that in this country there is a gap in terms of the legislature which protects human rights defenders, not only from the ANC. Comrade Zaki in his TAC days, he faced a lot of repression. Comrade Akolile and others have also been victims to the brutality of the state. So what would be your position in terms of pushing for legislation to be passed in Parliament where human rights defenders are protected?
Greetings, everyone. I actually wanted to ask a question of the chairperson. I think we might have touched on it at the beginning, but it was not made clear. Why isn't the DA here? What reasons to begin for not being here this evening? They need to be accounting to the people that are in the city. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I think Brent will know me, right? I'm from Brittisdorp as well, right? You know, a few years ago, just a small statement, a few years ago, we started creating a project where we sent 100 students to Paul's Bay College, right? For our housing project. Now, the DA is not here now. I think the DA is not. The DA is supposed to answer this specific question, where they took all the gram and things about those things, right? But when our project started, none of those students were allowed to work on site, right? Because now they only come with EPW, we must implement EPW, and then there's other things around this thing. But our students were never considered to work on site, right? Now, there's a specific question to the ANC, right? Why are ANC creating division? And this is the cause of this construction mafia that is going around now, not just in Cape Town, but in Durban as well. And what are they doing to eradicate this construction mafia? Because our project, we are sitting now for 16 years in Brittisdorp. Our project that was created by AXA, right, are standing dead stone because of the ANC. And I'm saying this straight because of the ANC. Right? We have created this construction mafia, allowing people to come and tax contractors, and then also the DA is also part of this whole thing. That's why I'm actually very disappointed that the DA is not here, right? Because they have created this thing about construction mafia. Thank you.
Manda. Manda. Wait, true. Okay. Kamalam Sinisa. I'm from Equal Education. Firstly, I just want to start by congratulating Equal Education for the past 16 years. So I want to direct a question to the ANC. I feel like there are a lot of questions that are for the ANC. And I know why it's difficult to be the member of the ANC and also to speak to people about the ANC. Because we have to realize that in its formation and in its existence, the ANC was not about giving back the land to the black people and the colored people in this time. The elite class that formed the ANC, you know better, wanted to be part of the colonial table to make sure that they had a seat in the vote after the 1939 end. So to talk about the ANC and the land question is going to be a future exercise. My question is directed to the EFF and is connected to what Uti was saying earlier. Your leader in 2019 or 2020, before COVID-19, stood up in front of a national television and said to the nation that if you are a South African and you have nothing to show that you are a South African and you have a house, you don't have land, you must start by what? By occupying land. And when people occupied land, they were victimized by the state, security, the police, and you are nowhere to be found. So if you are saying that there is a criminality that's happening in the building in Johannesburg, we occupy the building here in the waterfront. We are not criminals. People, they walk to work right now. They live in that building in physical location. So it's not only criminality. It's because people have seen that the only land that is there is those that are sold right. My last question, what is organizing looking like? Because we're talking about the theory of land, the motivational method. What is organizing looking like? When you want to implement and what is organizing looking like? Post elections and going towards election.
My name is Mulelo Kwane. I come from Kailicha, one of the land occupiers. I'm just very short here that we have a complicated movie and say EFS was not there when the people occupied land. According to communities there, when we started following together, when we started COVID together. So the communities were not kind there now. Anyway, I think it's a blessing in kind of disguise that the DA is not here. One of the people that are not supposed to be here is that it's not coming together with the we still have wounds of threats when he was still wearing the DA t-shirt. So I don't think it's not pleasant to still be here. Anyway, I want to direct my question to the area police. But comrades, I'll speak particularly about Cape Town and the Western Cape. And I think there was a speaker who said majority of the people or the population is black and colored. And we don't see much of political action, political programs happening around the colored spaces. I am now busy in 174 Hanabi, where we are busy assisting comrades there to occupy land and to forcefully go to the sea and fish. Because a lot of comrades are in the fishing industry area. And they are colors, they are not fishing lines. We can't wait for 2024. 2024 will find us much. I want to plead with the EFF to come and support us as we are assisting those colored communities. I think we've done a lot into the left areas. We need to start to move into the colored areas. And we should also invite Brett, who was victimized himself when he was a DANC, to come and
is that the question?
What's your question?
So that we can consciously accept us in our lives.
Kayla, ask for questions, not statements. Alright, that was our second round. Can I just get my question out of the way? Why is the DA not here? To be transparent, we did invite the Democratic Alliance. We invited national leadership as well as provincial and municipal leadership, right? We were assigned a representative who had confirmed, which is the current MACO member for human settlements. He then said that he cannot make it, but then reassigned this to the shadow minister of human settlements. So both representatives pulled out at the last minute. We got an email after 5 yesterday saying that both of them can no longer make the event. So that is the reason why the DA is not here. I cannot tell you more than that. I will leave that up to you. Can we ask the panelists to then answer the questions that were posed to them?
I'm not sure there was a question directly to me, but I want to respond to the Disposal of Government Land Act that you asked that we do respond to. And that's exactly why I was saying earlier, one of the to-do things is to use the land you have discretion over first. Because if you, I mean, there is an abundance of land. It may be that 72% of the land is in white hands, but there's still an abundance of land that is not used. And each of the spheres of government, the national government, the provincial government, the city government, they have land that they are the owners of, in inverted commas, but it's actually public land. They are just the custodians of it. And so when I say use the land that you have discretion over, national government use the Disposal of Government Land Act to dispose of land directly to communities who need land. It's also why I said we have to, and I try to squeeze it in my last 2 minutes, we have to, if the collective land ownership legislation doesn't make provision for community ownership in a way that works for those who live communally in an informal settlement, for example, then we must amend the legislation. But there is legislation for collective ownership of land. It's either sectional title currently, or share block, or co-op. But we can amend that legislation if it doesn't work for the solution. But the national government can dispose of land in its discretion. The provincial government has got, from 2012, 8 buildings in the CBD that they identified for integrated development of housing and commercial development. They haven't implemented one of them. It's in their discretion to release that land for development. And then the city of Cape Town, you know the story of why we were there, and why we left, and what happened. But we identified land in the inner city that was within the city's discretion to release for affordable housing and mixed-use housing and social housing. And so there is land in their custody that they can release for urban justice or land justice and affordable housing. They must just exercise the discretion. Thank you.
No, thanks, Lou. Of course, you must also be scientific in our approach. Right? The last land audit that happened, it said that 79% of land is private lands. The state presides over just a mere less than 13%. Because about 14% of it is unaccounted for. Now, when you go to this state land, it's talking about dumping area, talking about land that is not habitable. Our people are just not just looking for land for the sake of land. They are looking for land for purposes of housing, or looking for land for purposes of human settlement. They are looking for land for purposes of economic activity. So if we go and use the very little available land of state, we're going to place our people further and further away from the economic activity. On the issue of the construction mafia, I mean, the MEC of housing in the city of Cape Town is suspended. What is he suspended for? For taking money from the very construction mafias. So do not be afraid to call out the DA. You must tell them that the DA are the beneficiaries of corrupt money. The Guptas gave the DA money. You must be straight for it. Helen Zille is a beneficiary of Gupta money. So we must not separate these two components. As if the DA or the ANC and the DA are in bed together. They will be going to the moon apparently next year. Now on the issue of the colored communities, of course you are correct, right? There's been almost very little, of any activity in the EFF in the last, at least in the inception stages. But if you look at the EFF in its developmental stages, one, on the 2nd of October, just this coming month, we'll be marching to the city of Cape Town and the Indane, simply because we were approached by the colored taxi owners and taxi drivers complaining about the illegal impoundment. So the EFF will be going there to give practical support. We'll be placing our bodies in defense of these very same colored communities and the taxi owners of those particular taxis. On the issue of land occupation, there's no political party that has given people land to the equivalent of the EFF. You have been ahistorical. Kuda is correct when he tells you that we were with you in Polwe. At Regulation 5, I was physically there. We placed our bodies physically there. We have wounds of the DA, some of us here, of rubber bullets. When we blocked the very same law enforcement to try to remove our people from the very same lands. You must pay attention to what the EFF does, right? and properly locate the EFF within the historical development of the politics of South Africa. Part of what I've said here, I said here to Joanne, we'll be doing what is called the manifesto writing of the EFF. We have identified the fishing community as an important material stakeholder to the success of the EFF. Because we say this, it is one thing, comrades, to feed people fish. You also have to teach them how to fish. But more importantly, you have to give them access to fishing waters. And the access to fishing waters is primarily the land question. Because without the land, there will be no accessibility. Thanks.
So, your first question, yes. Land must be in the hands of the people. And again, as I've said, the lack of implementation and the lack of political will is why we are not there. Because all the policies and the legislation that Brett mentioned are important. Even the people that are living, majority of informal settlements are actually on public land. They're not, majority of them are not in private land, they're actually on public land. It's just a lack of political will why there's no human settlements development there. It's just the politicians that are there that are given the power to do that don't want to. That's what political will is about. And so I agree with that. I think the question of legislating for human rights defenders, that's not enough. We have a crisis of political leadership. We can have, and we do have, some of the best legislation. So I agree with that. We can have that legislation, but we need the right people there at the legislature, in parliament, at the provincial level, at the local level, to be the ones that are implementing this legislation and these policies. And that's why our politics is not about, I don't have to go to parliament if there's the best person here, there's the best candidate here that can make sure that that legislation is implemented. I don't have to go there. Our quest is to find the best ethical and capable leaders to take us through the route that we're in as a country. So it's not just enough to have legislation, we must have the best leaders as well. And I mean, this whole thing about the oppression and the repression that we get, it's important we talk about what we view and what we use law enforcement for, versus the conversation with the construction mafia. We need to flip that script. Because law enforcement is quick to act when it's black people that have stolen food because they are hungry. They're quick to act. We need to shift the focus of law enforcement. It must focus on the criminals that are in suit, that are in parliament. We need to strengthen law enforcement for that. More than homeless people that don't have homes. More than finding homeless people that don't have homes. That's the type of law enforcement we need. That's the type of rule of law that we need implemented to make sure that the criminals that are in suit are in jail. That's what we need.
Where do you start? First, the question of who should go to Parliament. We need people with ethics and so on to go to Parliament. That we need. But above all, we need to understand power. And power is not about having ethics. Power is understanding what property power is. Because without understanding white property power in South Africa, and without understanding property power globally, we cannot fix the land question. We cannot fix the land question. So, first question on the State Land Liability Act. It's fine, but I don't want to give the President the power to take land. That's an old apartheid law. That law needs to be changed. I would like to see who has solved some of the land issues. The people who are called unlawful occupiers. Those are the people who have solved the land question here. Informal settlement residents, Sisiko house occupiers, Ahmed Katara house occupiers. Those are the people who are implementing the Constitution. Because the Constitution says people have a right to land and housing. The Constitution says that first. The fact that people have to resort to that is because all our political parties, and I say all, are subject to property power. So we must address that question. We must address that question. When we come back, I would like to say here, today, you have a duty here, everyone here, not me. You have a duty to study, to educate, to accept that your political parties who are going to have grand visions and grand manifestos actually pass knowledge to you, or most importantly, learn from you. That is the critical question. I don't want us to beat up. I beat him up when he came. Right? But really, the ANC has failed us.
Yeah.
The ANC has failed us. It's not him who's failed us.
Just a victim.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would just like to respond. I think there were two questions that came from the floor, specifically to the ANC. The one is on pushing a legislation for protection of activists, and the other, also of the same nature, to do with security, because there's a I mean, it is, we're well aware, or rather some of us that is engaged in, in the land and tenure issue about the construction mafia that exists. Yeah, so both are of a security nature. Then, how do we protect activists and people fighting in that space, developers, from the negative effects that emanate from it? For me, I do think, right, to address this issue, it has to be, as I've reiterated many times before, a joint program, right? National, provincial, local, and all activists must stand together, because we have seen, if you put the ball in one person's court, the answer almost never gets addressed. So I definitely think that on both accounts, to really, from the activist side and the communities, I would really encourage pressure. Pressure. It was Madiba who said, the people who make history are the clergy, the carpenters, or all of the working class people who has the ability to push for change, right? So my argument to you especially is, please do intensify, because I can assure you that it doesn't matter who gets into power. The same thing may take place. Therefore, I'm saying nation building is a collective effort. It takes every one of us to craft the state which we wish to see. Because I can safely tell you, an increase in security and police budgets and all of the things is rather going to create a police state, as in the US. They are spending abundant amounts of money on security and the military, and nothing is fixed there as well. So what is the fundamental issue? There is not a collaborative program to combat the issues in society, and the same exists here. So I would like to argue, that we do take a united stance against the issues that find expression in our country.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are pressed for time. We are way over schedule. Thank you. Our panelists have graciously agreed to give us one final round, but of three. Of three. So I'll take the last 3 hands and we will close this program. I see. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, sorry, and then we're closing the program. Thank you.
Comrades, can we please set it down? This is the final round.
Okay.
Let's please set it down.
Amanda Bashar. Amanda Bashar. I'll be very, very short. I've got a lot to say, but I'll keep it just one question. But first, I thought, Chair, you gave too much airtime to these guys. They should have been listening to us instead of, because some of these questions, they should have been responding to us through their manifestos. Exactly. Let me not go on that one. I have just one question. Comrades, we know that the state is an instrument of class power. And to make it worse, it has been established in such a way that no one person can change it from the inside. So now, all of us who are sitting there as our contestants, what is the plan? Is it just enter and be part of the state, or why are we not also trying to build dual power? Power outside of that one of the state? Or is it only the state that can reform society? Manda?
I think he spoke a bit to my question as well, because it seems to me that most political parties are aiming for seats in parliament rather than to bring real change to our communities. And so, if you are serious about governing, my question is, what does your manifesto speak? What are you doing on the ground currently? Because even with the policies in place currently, they're not in touch with the realities on the ground, right? Because we don't see you on the ground. Then, pertaining to the construction market very quickly, is the city or whoever else are ticking boxes instead of really engaging with the communities. There's this PEC project, this engagement committee, or steering committees that we're supposed to have. If you're living in a windy house and it's falling apart, you have to watch where you walk, you're peeing in a bucket, all of these type of things. It's going to be in your interest to protect your housing development. And so the city hasn't been engaging with the communities or the beneficiaries of this housing that's need to be built in Delft and everywhere else. Hence, it's been given opportunities for construction mafias and everything else to intervene. And so, what is the plan regarding that?
The question also is on the question of power. The process of democracy.
Okay, I'll just maybe just quickly respond to the question around power outside of Parliament or outside of the state.
Comrades, can we please be patient? We're finishing up. Can you please be silent, Makabane? The comrades that are moving out, can you please stop the movement?
Yeah, so the question of power outside of the state, it's an important question, I think, and Zaki touched on it earlier when he said the occupations at Sissi Gur House and Ahmad Kathrada House and all of the informal settlements that we see, I mean, those are demonstrations of power outside of the state. And they move the state because there are engagements, not really successful, and maybe a bit slow, but there are engagements between the state and the occupiers. So there is power outside of the state. And my father, may his soul rest in peace, he passed away a few months ago. He taught us as kids, no one's going to give you power, you have to take it. So you can't ask us saying, to give you permission to take power. Take the power, like we've seen in Cape Town, where people have occupied buildings because the state has failed them. So yes, there must be power outside of the state, but you're going to have to take it like other brave people have taken it before you. Thank you.
No, thanks, Luke. I think the question of the state, of course, it's an ideological debate, right? But you are correct, where I agree with you is that we can build a dual power. And I think the EFF has been instrumental in building that particular dual power. Because as I've said in my introduction, is that the South African state is a post-modern capitalist state project. And it's inherently anti-black, right? And it's anti-poor, and it's anti the working class. Because currently the language that's coming out of the ANC is that they want NGOs now to be vetted by state intelligence. So what you are seeing is that the ANC state wants to suppress the very little dual power that we have. Comrades, we cannot give up on the state. It is the only thing we have, by the way. The people who are currently unbundling Eskom and the people who are going to buy Eskom are in Europe. The day we irritate them, they're going to switch off electricity. What we should do, we must think differently around the state. One, we must make corruption very punishable. People who are corrupt must go to jail for many, many, many years. But equally, we must build state capacity. It cannot be that the state cannot even buy its own toilet paper. Toilet paper. We want to put out a tender for toilet paper. So we need to de-tenderize the state and make sure that the state has its own capacity. On the issue of what are we doing practically now, and what are we going to be doing practically in terms of after elections, like I've said, one, on the 2nd of October, as the EFF will be leading a march to Ndabeni, together with the progressive, leftist movements and other peace-loving South Africans, so that we register our position against the DA-led municipality and the broader Western Cape government. But also we'll be doing what is called the Mamela phase of our election manifesto, where we'll be going practically to communities to listen to them, for them to shape our manifesto. And like I've said to you, if our manifesto is not a reflection of the people's voice, we are ready to resign from the EFF. Thanks.
Thank you. It is not up to the people that are here and the political parties that are represented here to fix our country. It can never happen. It will never happen. It is only through our collective power that we are able to do that. The fact that you give your vote doesn't mean that you should give your power away when you vote next year. You still have your power to continue to organize in your communities and to make sure that some of the things that we can fix are fixed in communities. And that's what the Rising Mzansi has begun to do. We have begun a mission of building a political movement rather than just a political party. Because the work that we do is not just about getting into power next year and then forgetting about the things that we have been talking about. It is to continue to build the collective power of people in different communities. And when I talk about collective power, it gets to that point that our comrade there, the fighter, was talking about. We don't only organize in black communities, because I did say that apartheid did that for us. They divided us. And so we try to build solidarity between black, African, and colored communities, so that that collective power, in the context of Cape Town at least, and in the long run, in the context of the Western Cape and the country, is the one that takes us out of here. And what we are doing now, and what we'll continue to do post-elections, is to support communities in what we call community actions. Communities understand the issues. Communities have the power to solve some of these issues. It's just that they lack resources. What we've started to do in different communities is support certain communities with certain resources in terms of fixing the things that seemingly are small, but to those communities are big things. And that's what we do. That's what community power is about. And that's what the rise in Mzansi politics is about.
Yes, thank you. In terms, there was a question. Thank you. There was a question regarding manifesto positions. I'm not privy to share anything because I don't know yet. The ANC will release that. Hence, I'm saying keep your eyes and ears open for if and when the ANC does release its manifesto review. And as our comrade has mentioned from Rise Mzansi, as I've reiterated before as well, many of our problems, there's no single person that can fix that. It's a collective effort, as iterated before. And I would also like to just tell to my comrade in the EFF, I'm very happy that there's going to be a march, on the taxi strike to Indabedi, but I was a bit disappointed that he didn't mention that they're not with the ANC to form part of that program. So thank you. I will then be closing off now with my point. Thank you.
Just the last, I want to say thank you to everyone. I want to speak as an individual now. I think every individual who stands for Parliament has a duty to sign a contract with their community. Yes. And you should have the right to recall any of us who get elected. And I have signed such a contract. But that's not good enough. Everyone here knows that all of us, I know many comrades here who I've worked with, help occupy, help build movements, and help educate people. That is what I continue to commit to as a Member of Parliament. If I don't do that, and if I don't bring your voice into Parliament, your voice needs to come into Parliament, not mine. I will, as the Commander-in-Chief said, only have 1.5 minutes in the National Assembly. But you have the right to come and make presentations about the land question, about hunger, and about austerity. Madla!
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our program. Thank you for your patience. We know we have run over time. I would just like to close the session by saying one thing. I'll take one quote out of this whole debate. Power is not given, it is taken. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
I know I was meant to respond to your message, but I'm always available, but I'm sure I've been under so much pressure.
It's fine. I just had to do the things around. I just don't know. I haven't researched the segment that you did. So if I do, because things are changing also, I'll let you know.
Yeah, also for me, a call is much easier because text, it's just there's so many things and so if you just so if you just say hey, I'll be sure, and then
cool. Nah, it's cool. Now I know. I'll hit you up.
Alright, cool.
Nice.